the bullet hole in the door, this one here, that's the one that killed her. And they say that it was a sharpshooter, but I don't believe that. I think it was just a soldier shooting back and forth. There's several of them up there in the door. And this window here, a bullet came through this window. You'll see when you go in, the bullet was lodged in the bedpost where she was laying. Her sister was laying with the baby. Her sister, Georgia, had just delivered a baby 3 days. So the mother was in here in a bed, and the baby was in there. And the bullet just missed them. It was just incredible. Who knows the story of Jennie Wade? A little bit? Okay. Jennie Wade was the only civilian killed during the 3-day battle. Picture yourself right here, July the 3rd, precisely at 8:30 on July the 3rd in the morning. Okay, somehow the Confederates started shooting again. Bullets were flying everywhere. Jennie was in the kitchen, and those of you that will go in will see she's in the kitchen and she's kneading dough. What does it mean to knead dough? Okay, you're working the dough, okay, for bread. So she's leaning over the dough box. That's why the bullet is so low, because somebody asked, well, how could that kill somebody being so low? Well, she was leaning over. The bullet comes in, goes through this door, goes through the kitchen door, and kills her instantly. She just falls on the floor. She was 20 years old. She was engaged to a young man by the name of Corporal Jack Skelly. They were to be married in October. Unfortunately, Jack Skelly was killed at the Battle of Winchester, and he died about 5 days later after Jennie died. Neither one knew the other had been killed. And their best friend, Wesley Culp, you've heard of Culp's Hill? His grandfather owned Culp's Hill. He was from Gettysburg, but before the war, he went south and he joined with the Confederate Army. So you probably heard of that saying, brother against brother, friend against friend, father against son. The whole country was divided. So he went south. He came up, he ended up in Gettysburg. He was killed on his grandfather's farm on Culp's Hill, just below Culp's Hill. When you go in here, you're going to see how tiny this is. Girls, they didn't have closets. They had armoires. Jennie probably only had 1, 2, maybe 3 dresses to her name. Maybe 2 pairs of shoes. They did not have a lot of clothes. And that's kind of hard for us to understand when we have closets that we can go in and choose whatever we want to. Okay, let's start exactly what happened minute by minute. Precisely at 8:30 on July the 3rd, 1863, Jennie is getting ready for breakfast. Before she had breakfast, she went around the corner and you can still see the pump well. She would always gather the water in that bucket. Okay? Then she would come back on around, bring the water in the house. Then she would begin to knead the dough, getting ready. They have a little, like a little stove in there where they would cook the dough. Before she did that, she laid down over here underneath this window where there was a lounge there, and she had her devotion. She was very, very devout to Christianity, and I have in my book I wrote, I have the exact scripture that she was reading in her devotion that morning. She gets up, makes sure her sister's okay, who just had the baby, checks on the baby, comes into the kitchen, begins to prepare breakfast. Precisely at 8:30, how we know this is her sister, Georgiana, who lived through this, who had the baby, tells the story to Johnson, who wrote a book that I based my book upon his findings. Precisely at 8:30, a bullet goes through this door, penetrates 2 doors, comes in her back, comes out her corset. Women wore these real thick corsets, and the bullet lodged there as it went through her heart. She dropped instantly. Well, the mother starts screaming. Her mother was in there, and Georgiana starts screaming. Yes? Oh, thank you. Okay. Got a problem? Okay. All right, so basically you have a dead body laying here in the kitchen. So everybody's screaming. We don't know how two soldiers got in here, but there were two soldiers upstairs. And when they heard the girl screaming, they came down, and they decide they can't come out the front door, obviously, with the body. Well, the mother wanted the body out of the kitchen. Well, there's bullets flying everywhere. So they went upstairs, and they knock a hole in the wall. Now, this was an apartment, so it's divided up. And they knock this large hole. You'll see it. It's still knocked out. They knock a hole. They get the body, go up the steps, go through the hole on the other side, down the other side of the steps, out the back door, and take her down the basement. And they lay her on a canning table, how they used to can food and store food. And she laid there until July the 4th, I think. And then they buried her in the backyard in the garden. She stayed there, her body, for 1 year. Then her family wanted her reinterred, so they dug her up, took her to the Lutheran cemetery, and then a few years later, they dug her up again. Well, she really had a journey. Then she went from the Lutheran cemetery to where we're going to go later, to where she rests now. She was 20 years old. Her life was just beginning. Why there wasn't more civilians killed during the 3-day battle, it was miraculous. I mean, bullets were flying everywhere. You have to remember, this was a town of what, about 4,500, smaller than Ashland, Ohio. It's a tiny town. Now you've got 75,000 men coming in from every angle. Can you imagine the impact on the community? Probably 99% of the civilians went into the fruit cellar. They went down the basement, except Jennie. And on the first day, as the troops, the Union was retreating down this street here, this was a one lane dirt. Coming down the street, Jennie would go to the pump. You can see it right over here, pump the water, bring a bucket of water out to the side here, and give the soldiers water. Also, if she had any bread, she would give the soldiers bread. Now, she should have been in the basement with everybody else, but she wasn't. That's why Abraham Lincoln, when he came in November, made mention of her and allowed her sister to sit with him on the platform. Am I correct on that? Can you imagine? Back then, women were to be seen, not heard. And here is her sister up on the platform, and he's delivering the Gettysburg Address. So she's going back and forth on the first day. Back to the pump, get water, come out here, give the troops water. Then she'd go back. I mean, she's a real hero. On the second day, she did the same thing. On the third day, I'm assuming she was going to do the same thing after she baked the bread, get water, buckets of water, the bread, come on out here to the street, or the wounded. You can imagine her sister talks about the wounded all in the back. Everything was in the back. Nobody wanted to be out here, okay? And she would take care of the wounded. That's what she was doing when she was instantly killed at 8:30. We know the exact time because her sister was there, and her sister, of course, wrote about it years later. Any questions anybody would have? Yes?
It's kind of odd. It doesn't make sense that she would just be going about her day as normal when there's troops firing at her. Do you think it all happened at once because maybe there were Union troops gathered here and all of a sudden they just barraged the house?
No, this was no man's land. This was the DMZ zone. If you stepped out where we are now, you'd be dead in minutes. I mean, the Confederates were right down the street about 300, 400 yards.
So these bullet holes, though, are all, do you think they're all at once, or they're over the course of the couple
They're over the course of 3 days.
So she's just going about her everyday business?
Her everyday business.
With bullet holes of just randomly?
Bullets were flying everywhere. She was taking care of her sister who just had a baby. Can you imagine ladies having a baby that's 3 days old? You know, you're laying there in bed. Now, when you get in there, you'll see the bullet in the bedpost. It's a miracle that she wasn't killed, the mother or the baby. No, this was an accumulation of 3 days of battle. Any other questions anybody would have?
Soldiers that were upstairs, were they Union or?
They were definitely Union. Her sister doesn't know how those two soldiers got upstairs. So apparently the first day or the second day they came in the door, went upstairs using the two windows. Maybe they were snipers, all right, because they were shooting back and forth. The one house we're going to see later, if we go back into town, when the family came back home. They found the, 2 dead Confederates in their living room that they had been killed where bullets came through the window there. One had a table up thinking that that table would protect him. You know the story? That bullet went right through the table and killed him instantly. So you can imagine how these civilians, 4,500 of them, and the stench, because it was like 90 degrees. Am I correct on that? About
90, they think it could have surpassed 100.
and you had 5,000 bodies laying everywhere all over the town. 5,000. And horses. How many horses, Miss?
I don't know, but
5 or 6,000 dead horse. You know, you have a dead. How do you bury a dead horse without a backhoe? They had dead horses everywhere. They had dead bodies everywhere, and they had to get rid of it. So most of the town people tried to bury if they found a body in their backyard. Can you imagine that? You go in your backyard, there's bodies, or in your house, and so they buried some, but most of them were gathered, temporarily buried, and then they went up to the main cemetery later. Yes.
So, where was Jennie Wade's dad and the sister's husband?
Jennie Wade's dad was in prison. He was arrested for stealing money. Okay, Jennie was not really looked down upon as high society or class in Gettysburg. So he was in prison. Her mother was living with the sister in the first part of the house. The house is divided up into 2 apartments, as you can see. So yeah, he was in prison. The mother was in the house. Her young brother was in the house. Her sister Georgiana and the baby. And they brought the body through the upstairs, through the hole, came down, came out that back door, went down the basement, and that's where the body laid until July the 4th. Then they came out to the garden out here and buried.
And then her sister's husband, was he fighting?
He was in the war fighting, that's correct. Yeah. Just everybody, if you weren't here, you were in the war. Yes, question?
so like, what is the garden? So we're talking about part of the flower bed or part of the
The garden was back here somewhere, and that's where they buried her for 1 year. There wasn't this was all open ground. Yeah. This was the safe side. You wanted to be on this side during the battle. Now the Union troops were up here on the hill, right about where the entrance to the cemetery where we're going to walk up. That's basically where the Union troops were entrenched. Confederates were down this way. They barricaded, the street probably 300 yards. They had a barricade through there. So they were just shooting back and forth. You would not want to stand out here at that moment. Any other questions anybody would have? You can see a lot of people come by and lay flowers, pennies. Her first grave site, if you can remember, was right behind the house in the garden. She was there for 1 year. Then they interned her body, brought her to the Lutheran church. She was buried there for a few years. And then finally they brought her here, where she has been ever since. About 100 paces that way is where her fiance, Corporal Jack Skelly, is buried. Seems fitting, I guess, that they're so close in death as far as their bodies, like they were in life. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn this over to Mr. Rice. He is going to take us to the spot where Abraham Lincoln gave the address. And are you sharing anything? Okay. All right. Mr. Rice, take us where you want.